Whew. It's going to be a wet one today. Why, you ask? Well, I just got rained on walking over here. Just want to make a cool video, and I got soaked. That's pretty much the only reason why. So, other than that, what are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about quarantine tanks and why I think it's the most overlooked thing in the hobby. So we can talk about the reasons you need them. Stay tuned. All right, welcome. My name is Dan Connor, your host of the Aquarium Insider Podcast, and today we are talking about quarantine tanks. So, without any further ado, let's just kind of jump into it. So, what is a quarantine tank? For those of you who might be new, you're like, what is a quarantine tank? Well, essentially, a quarantine tank, just gonna get some water off my face. Sorry, it's still a little wet too. A quarantine tank is a buffer tank between bringing new fish into your already established aquarium and the store you bought them from or the online store you bought them from. So why would you need a quarantine tank? What's the point? How many times, if you're new to the hobby and you haven't seen this, but you've been around, you've probably seen this happen before. How many times have you gotten fish from a store, you brought them home, you put them in your aquarium, and then out of nowhere, all your fish have ick. And you're like, the store sold me sick fish. Well, possibly, right? But another thing is, those fish could just have underlying things that they didn't see or you didn't see when you purchased them. So we, as aquarists, have to do our best job of making sure we're not adding sick fish to the aquarium. Picture this. I give you $50 and I say, hey, I'm gonna give you another $50, but there's a 50-50 chance this whole pile of money I'm gonna give you is gonna light on fire. And you just keep and I just keep giving you money. And eventually that whole pile is gonna light on fire. That's essentially what you're doing when you're just adding brand new fish to your aquarium. So the first thing I just wanna answer in this video is I think it's a misnomer in the industry. Maybe it's not, you tell me. If you're buying fish from a fish store, normally, whatever it is, and you don't have a quarantine tank set up, it's likely you're going to have problems at some level, because you got to think about all the things that happen on that fish's journey, right? How did that fish get from wherever it came from to your local pet store? It's been on quite a journey. So it's either been on a journey from maybe Florida, from a farm to one of the local distributors, and then to your pet store, a little bit less, right? But if you're buying things like rummy nose tetras, most betas, let's see, what else can I think of that's imported in? A lot of your platies now, a lot of your swords all come from overseas. It has quite a few more stops before it makes it to you. It typically will come from whatever farm overseas. That could be Singapore, that could be Bangkok, that could be Sri Lanka, that could be Vietnam, Malaysia, Hong Kong, China with the big fancy goldfish. It could be any of those, right? They leave the farm, then they go to the exporter, right? And then from the exporter, they'll get shipped over here. And there's a couple different ways they might travel, right? They could go to a massive transshipper, where they're bringing in a bunch and then they're selling them off to either larger wholesalers or other distributors, right? Or, some people cut a link out of the chain and they go direct to the distributor from there, right? And then the distributor distributes to your pet stores. And then your pet store gets them, right? That fish has been in and out of different water quality parameters from Singapore to California, Seattle, could be stopped off in Missouri. It could have stopped in a few different places, right? And then it makes it to your local pet store and it's stressed out. It's more than likely going to have problems at some level, right? So it requires your due diligence to make sure you're putting a healthy fish in your aquarium. Because a lot of times, and most pet stores, most fish stores don't have the space to quarantine new fish. It's very expensive per square foot to rent a retail space. they don't have a lot of the times to be able to not sell something that's come in. They might be able to keep it in a separate tank, hopefully, maybe leave it for a little bit, see how it comes in, right? And the fish has been treated beforehand. It's not that the fish hasn't been treated beforehand, but it's very difficult for a retail store to sell fish, to basically hold fish in a separate location unless they got a really good deal on the retail space. It's just not a very affordable way to run a business. Now, best management practices, they could quarantine them. Of course, that's great management practices. But for us as hobbyists, as us as aquarists, we have to make sure whatever fish we're introducing in our aquarium, that we do what we can to make sure it's healthy. So we need a quarantine tank. I'm sorry, you need one. It's detrimental. And basically, you're just trying to make sure you don't kill everything else in your tank. Do you want to add possibly sick fish and then the whole tank blow up on you because maybe you're unfamiliar with how to deal with it and how to deal with the issues, right? So let's go ahead and let's go into what is in a quarantine tank setup. All right. So quarantine tank setup doesn't require a ton. I'm not looking for a full fancy setup with aquarium kits and all that stuff. Let's keep it simple, right? For most of us, if they're smallerish fish for the most part, let's talk about community fish setup. Maybe that's a little bit easier. If you're keeping community fish and anything from like a 29 to a 55 and they're smaller, generally speaking, you can put most of those inside of a 10-gallon tank. Mind you, we're considering this a very temporary home. This is just to make sure those fish are not introducing new pathogens into our home aquariums. That's kind of the point, right? So that's something to consider. So a 10-gallon aquarium, pick it up at $1 per gallon sale, pick it up at your local stores, marketplaces have them all the time. Just pick one of those up, right? You need a filter. If it's me and I'm putting a filter on there, I think a sponge filter and aquarium pump work fine for this. If you don't have one and you just like, well, I got an extra hang-on back, only thing I would say is remove the carbon filter cartridges that are out of it. The carbon's going to remove a lot of the biologics or maybe some of the stuff we're going to treat the fish with. It would remove it out of the water. And we will make sure that doesn't happen because we need to treat the fish for X amount of time, right? So let's do that. And then as long as you have those things, I don't think you need a light specifically. If you've got ambient light in the room, I think that's okay. If you want to put a light to more visually inspect the fish, I think that's probably a really extra great thing to do. But I'm trying to keep it really cheap and cost effective as best I can. That's the biggest point I want behind this, right? All right, so now we've got our tank, we've got a filter of some kind, and we're ready to go, right? Hopefully, now I didn't mention this. Let me mention this real quick. Your hang-on back or your sponge filter, I'm hoping it's already been seeded, meaning you let some sort of biological media. Hopefully, you have something like this in your aquarium. You let that season in your tank that you already had established and you put it in this new little quarantine tank. If you don't have this and you just have cartridges, I need to make a video on filtration next. So maybe that's what I do next time, is a video on filtration. But you need something in there where the good bacteria has already been established for the most part, right? If you don't have that, I recommend getting one of these. Sorry, I'm just reaching for stuff because I see it here. So these are basically bacterial starters where you can add to any size aquarium. We like Fritz 7. We also use Dr. Tim's. We've used them both, had great results with both of them. Essentially, it's just where you can put fish in the aquarium the same day without having massive ammonia and nitrite spikes, which if you're not familiar with the nitrogen cycle, go check out my first video